Welcome to another episode of the Dentology podcast, where we discuss the business of dentistry. In this podcast series, we'll be discussing all the non-clinical aspects of dentistry, from goodwill values, finance, marketing, how to buy and sell a dental practice, mindset, through to where you can invest your money in team management issues. My name is Andy Acton, and I'm joined by my co-host, Chris Strevens. Let's jump straight into it. So welcome to our latest edition of Dentology, the Business of Dentistry podcast. And this morning we're joined by Steve Pratt. And Steve is was a senior healthcare senior healthcare banking consultant at Lloyds Bank for 16 years, but worked for the bank for 43 years.
43 years.
I know. It's
my word.
Fascinating to see what work changed over that massive period of time. Like in Mastermind, his specialist subjects are GPs and dentists. So we'll quiz him and see if we can get him through to the final on that specialist subject. He holds his private pilot's license and is a sporty chap enjoying football and a variety of other sports, including supporting Tottenham Hotspur, which might come up in conversation possibly.
It's possible. Just look at my mug.
So welcome, Steve. How are you doing?
Thanks, guys. Yeah, I'm doing really, really well. And, we might as well cover that one off now. I'm doing very, very well, particularly after last night, the epic win at Leicester.
So for those that didn't know, Tottenham had a win last night, and unusually, I think the game was won in something like the 96th or 97th minute, wasn't it? So Steve's in good form as we're recording today.
I don't think my headphones are working, because I couldn't hear anything from anyone then at the moment. So let's just move on, shall we?
No, I'm in very good form as we're above Arsenal. But anyway, maybe we'll come back to football a little bit later.
We might circle back to it. But before we get started on your career and what you're up to now, Steve, what's your background? Where did you grow up? What was your upbringing like? Where did you come from?
Okay, born and brought up in Reading, very much Berkshire based, all the way through. Really, we didn't move until I got married in 85. I actually joined the bank in 1977, which 45
Queen
years.
Silver Jubilee, that was, Steve.
Absolutely
it was.
right, and
street parties were a thing then, weren't they? Do you remember the street parties?
Yeah.
I remember I went as a Roman centurion to our street party, and I placed second as a Roman centurion.
Nice.
I remember it well. That I started my banking career with Lloyds. In fact, I did a couple of A levels at grammar school, as it was then, and I must confess I didn't do particularly well in my A levels. There was a woman on the go at the time, and we nearly got engaged back in those very early days. But my mother always blames her for the fact that I scraped a couple of D's at A level. But that got me a couple of offers from banks. I think NatWest, actually Midland Bank at the time, and then Lloyds offered me a job, and I joined Woodley, which is just on the outskirts of Reading, and I spent pretty much all of my early banking life in the Reading area, really all the way up until about 1985. But, banks in those days were very different to banks these days.
Yep.
I remember starting off right at the bottom of the pile in the machine room.
Yeah, the waste room.
Keying the entries, the debits and the credits.
That was progress. You used to file checks into alphabetical order, I seem to remember, in my day in the Lloyds Bank.
Absolutely.
Steve, did you want to work in a bank when you were a young kid and you did your A levels and you left school? Did you kind of have this desire to work in a bank, or did you just fall into it?
I didn't really. I mean, my passion. I've always been very keen on flying in terms of air travel. Been a bit of a geek watching aeroplanes, and I'd love to have. When I was, knee-high to grasshopper, I wanted to be a pilot. But clearly, with 2 Ds in A levels, I had absolutely nil chance of doing that. So I always said at that time, when I was that young, that one day in my life I will actually be able to fly an aeroplane. So we'll come on to that in a minute. But so the bank, quite a lot of my friends in the schools at the time were going into finance, and so I thought, well, yeah, why not? It's it's a career for life, as it was in 1977. And, 43 years later, when I retired, in November of 2020, it was, those days have gone, have long.
Oh, yeah. I only ask because it's one of those ones where a lot of people talk about, like, know your why, what's your passion? Yeah. And I don't think a lot of people know. And a lot of people feel bad for not knowing. And they're like, I don't know what I'm passionate about. But in your case, you kind of went into banking for no obvious or compelling reason, but stuck around for 43 years and clearly enjoyed it. Yeah. And I think the message to people perhaps is it's all right not to know what you want to do. And if you try things, you might find something you really enjoy that wasn't obvious to you, as opposed to kind of trying to contemplate and analyse and work out what you're interested in. If you just try a few things, something might come at you.
I mean, that's the thing, is it? Do your best, no matter what you end up with being. Yeah. Do your best, because we can't all be fighter pilots. We can't all be footballers, but we can be really good people at filing checks in alphabetical order.
I think it was Muhammad Ali, wasn't it? Muhammad Ali says, I'm the greatest boxer in the world, but if I wasn't and I'd been a bin man, if I'd been putting out the trash, I'd have been the greatest bin man in the world. And it's that attitude, isn't it? That you can be good at anything without necessarily needing to be the thing that you're deeply, deeply passionate about. What I love as well, Steve, we will get to it, is that real early desire to get yourself in the skies came true later on in life, and we'll come back to that. So you're a dying breed, and you're quite unique because you work for an organisation for 43 years. And I was reading a little while ago, they think now most people will go through 3 distinct careers in their lifetime. They'll have 3 completely separate things. They might requalify and do something else. So you're quite unusual in that you sat within one organisation and within one sector for all that time. So rolling back to the very beginning, how did it look then, and what were the changes? And I don't necessarily mean the technical banking changes, things like work habits, work-life balance, communication. What was the hierarchy back like then? What did banking look like in the 70s and now to where we are now?
And how did your progression get to go from filing checks to being, because I think at the end of the day you were like head of the healthcare bit, weren't you?
Yeah.
So how did you go from there to there? And you must have made some decisions, taken some opportunities. You don't get this stuff given to you, do you?
No, I mean, you're absolutely right, Chris. And I think that if I go back to the early days, I mean, the technology side, we won't cover that off. But in terms of just personnel, the numbers of people in banking then was massive. I mean, I went into Broad Street, Reading, which was one of the main bank branches of Lloyds at the time. And I was there as a manager's assistant. So I was working for one of the managers there. And we had a staff in that branch of 95 people. 95 people. Wow. Now, if you look across you look across the high streets now, and you see banks in massive buildings. Now, I can tell you that Broad Street, Reading, has now got a staff of 5.
Wow.
Now, that shows you how things have changed. All of the back office stuff obviously no longer happens in bank branches, and all you've got really is a cashiering team. And then you've got, on remote locations, you've got sort of business teams. And, back in the days, we had secretaries, but now obviously everything's changed on the technical side there. I remember in my sort of early managerial days, lunches used to go on for 2.5 hours up the pub, and you did a lot of business in the pub. And you did have a bit of a headache, you didn't do a great deal in the afternoons. Back in those days, you had smoking at desks. Not that I'm a smoker, but things were very, very different. And the manager would definitely have been a Mister.
Absolutely. Back then, it was very unusual for women to be in senior positions, and the manager would also be called Mr. Jones, Mr. Smith, whatever it would have been.
Yeah. I mean, the old Dad's Army, Captain Mannering cyber bank manager, probably was a little bit before I joined the bank, but that sort of standing in the community certainly was there in those. I remember my first bank branch in Woodley, as I mentioned earlier, and I remember him now. Fred Winter, his name. And he, in the local community, was seen to be one of the pillars of the community. He'd been there for a number of years. And he was a bit of the old Captain Mannering type of person. But yeah, just going on to me, with my 2 A levels that I scraped into, which was geography and economics, which sort of helped a bit, I was then put on what they call the foundation course for the Institute of Bankers examinations.
Oh, yeah.
So that gave me a bit of a fast track through to doing the ACIB, in fact, the AIB, Associate of Institute of Bankers, as it was at the time. And so that was a sort of a degree status. And I finally got that degree in 1983. And that then coincided with me being accepted onto the management stream. So there was a selection centre. I always remember this. It was at Hindhead. And it was tough. I mean, these selection panels were very, very tough. And I got onto the management stream. And as long as you keep up your progress, then what happens then is that you're taken through various stages. And, back in those days, I ended up with 4 house moves within 5 years. And the bank paid every time.
And where were they from, Steve? Were they sort of, where did you end up as sort of in your 4 moves?
Yeah, so in terms of from Reading, in 1985, I got married and with Ali, and we'll obviously come on to kids and stuff in a moment. But he, from 1985, when we got married, I was then moved to the regional head office in Aylesbury. And so we moved to Aylesbury, but I was only there for 18 months. And that gave me a completely different perspective of the bank. I was working with the regional general manager, and we were doing a lot of strategy stuff for 18 months. And from there, I was then moved to Wantage. So we then moved across to Farringdon. And Farringdon was in Oxfordshire. And I then took in 2 jobs there. I was an assistant or sub-manager, as it was in those days, in Wantage. And then I got my first managerial appointment in Newbury.
Oh, wow.
And I worked in Newbury for about 2 years. And then I was then asked to come to Devizes. Wow. And 29 years ago now, we moved. And that was my final house move 29 years ago when we moved to just outside of Devizes. And I became the business manager at Devizes branch. So that was in, 1992. And I think, if I go back, probably 93, 94 were the last times that anybody got moved with the bank paying for a house move. I mean, those days have long, long gone.
And where did healthcare come out of that then? So did you get your experience 92 and onwards, or how did that sort of end up?
No. From 92 onwards, I was a business manager, and really from 92 all the way through to when I retired, I was in the business stroke commercial arm of the bank. One of the key dates for me has always been 1995, which for those geeks will recall is when Lloyds actually merged with TSB.
Oh, yeah.
And I'd had 3 years in the business at the time, and we had a local TSB to us in the sort of Devizes area. And I was very, very keen on looking at how we could exploit what TSB were good at. And TSB had a healthcare division. And these are back in the old days of the 1% over base rate cost rent schemes for GPs. And I said to the bank at the time, I said, look, Lloyds haven't got a healthcare brand, and there are so many GPs, dentists, etc., pharmacists that we look after. Why don't we try and do something to actually exploit that? But that fell on, unfortunately, deaf ears at the time. So, that was 95. And it wasn't really until 2005 that we finally got to the point where we were starting to get things moved together. And if you like, I can sort of cover off how we managed to get into the healthcare side, because that's quite interesting. But yeah, so I had a bit of a passion for healthcare pretty much from 1995 onwards.
And it shows it takes time as well, doesn't it? If between that period, getting large organisations to buy into new things isn't something that happens quickly. You have to kind of keep chipping away and get a couple of people on side, and they might then talk to different people, and slowly it builds. It was a real slow process to get it, into the right people.
it was massively slow, and sort of the thing that made the difference was in 2004. I sort of jumped ship from being a senior manager, excuse me, looking after teams of business managers, which I'd been doing all the way through from 1992 really to 2004. I'd been leading business teams, excuse me, and in 2004 I decided to become a bit of a master of my own destiny, and I joined the newly created business development team of Lloyds. And it was under the leadership of a guy by the name of Neil Fender. Now, Neil was a real maverick and very much out of sort of the Lloyds Bank mould. And he wanted to make a difference. And he really did re-energise a lot of bankers that had become stale, but were bloody good at selling, and actually very good business development managers. And so there were, what happened was that I joined the team, and a colleague and I, Ian Crompton, who obviously you know well, who then became head of healthcare. Ian and I were given the task by Neil Fender of setting up a business development team within healthcare. And that's when I started to get involved with people like Alan Springer, because Alan...
Alan Springer, there's a name from the past, I tell you.
Alan was ploughing his own furrow with you guys, particularly, in doing dental deals. Now, Alan was doing dental deals not just in bloody London, but all over the country. And suddenly the Moorgate dental book just exploded. And I said, well, hang on a second. So how are you doing this, Alan? And he was explaining the relationship that he had with you guys. And I said, well, look, surely around the country there must be other people that have got brokers and introducers that are more focused on healthcare. And of course there was. So you had people like John Saltonstall up in the Midlands who had relationships with pharmacies. You had other people all around the country that had relationships with brokers in the healthcare sector. So Ian and I approached Neil and said, look, we think that we can set up a bespoke healthcare business development team. And so what we did, we picked 20 managers, and this is when business development had about 80 managers across the country. So 20 business development managers were brought into the healthcare team, and Ian and I led that. And we then put together some bespoke training and a 3-day training course. And that was the sort of start of healthcare. But,
I mean, putting that off, Steve, as a piece of work, you kind of you sort of skiffle through it fairly quickly. But to go from having a bank that had no knowledge, expertise, commitment to that, to hearing how you and a few other guys just started it, looked at it, pulled it together, to coming bang up to date now where we are, where it is absolutely a specialty, and not just within Lloyds where you were from. There's a number of banks now that focus on healthcare as being one of their green light sectors, but until like pre the mid-90s, that just didn't exist.
So when Lloyd's not doing effectively, because obviously I used to do GP, cost rent loans and dental stuff. Yeah. So they were basically just not pushing that boat. They would sort of let it dwindle on the vine almost. Wow.
They were, and it was a crying shame. But we lost the initiative, because the one bank that did it right and built their healthcare team was RBS. So what I wanted to do in those early days was pretty much replicate what RBS had created, and we started that off really in the dental sector. We then developed our credit policies in terms of goodwill lending, primarily in the dental sector. Pharmacy then followed, and care homes as well. So the social care side followed from that. We included opticians at the time. Vets then came in, and really until a little bit later that the GP sector came into the fold as well. And probably one of the most important things was then the bank seeing how successful the business development healthcare team was. And we put up papers to the managing director of business banking, as it was at the time, really strongly recommending that we segment our customer base. and then bring in specialist healthcare relationship
without
managers.
Without getting too technical. In the early days, were the terms that were offered to dentists similar to businesses, but a little bit better compared to where we are now, where the terms available to dentists are significantly better than general businesses? The terms that are on offer to professionals and dentists in particular are very favourable. Was there kind of an improvement over time as the banking sector got more comfortable with the profession?
Yeah, I think, to get a foot in the door, I think what you have to do is, because you don't have a reputation, you're almost having to do that on price. Then you then start to look at where that takes you. And so we did. We had to come in, and I remember the days when, the early days in dentistry, where RBS were offering 1 over base, 1.5 over base for freeholds, and 2% for goodwill, and less than that. So there's no way that we could have actually got involved in that if we weren't matching those sorts of terms. So we were effectively matching what the competition were offering. And then what we then did was build our brand and build our reputation, and really our USP in terms of the CPD that we put our just through regularly. A bit like, what we wanted to do was replicate the way in which professionals within healthcare have to go through their own CPD. We wanted to replicate that with our banking relationship managers and business development managers, so that we were all talking the same language. And that was really important.
And success builds success, doesn't it? If you're making a pig's ear of it, the answer is, guess what? You don't get to expand and write a more expansive credit policy. But when you're being successful and not losing money, that's the key from the bank's point of view.
Jumping to the end, Steve. Obviously, you're no longer in banking, and we'll come on to what you're doing now in a minute. But just prior to leaving, and your kind of observations of where the banking sector's now, where is it in terms of supporting the profession post-COVID? Because obviously the last couple of years have seen a lot of things thrown up in the air, and they haven't necessarily landed where they were before. But what does it look like now?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, one of the things was that, excuse me, I was actually going to be looking to retire earlier than I did. But the bank, we were then having to work from home, obviously, when COVID hit. And they asked me to take on leading the bank's healthcare COVID strategy. And we put that together pretty quickly. And consequently, I stayed on, as I say, all the way through till November 2020. And we supported and were able to support a large number, particularly dentists. Obviously, the GP sector really had its own, that wasn't really affected. Pharmacy wasn't really affected. So it tended to be veterinary and dental were the two main sectors that were affected by COVID. We put millions of pounds out in COVID support for dentists. And I think the dental sector is a very resilient sector, as you guys very, very well know. And I think that because it's so resilient and because there are few failures, that's not to say there aren't any failures, that's the key. It's a sector that the bank has remained very, very close to throughout COVID and beyond. So the bank certainly, I'm still very much in contact with a lot of my ex-colleagues, and Jen Scott, who I'm delighted to say has just been appointed head of healthcare for the broker development side. So Jen and I, effectively, Jen was working as essentially my replacement, and we were actually working together for a good few years, actually, because I was hanging around and not going. but no, I'm delighted. Jen's absolutely the right person to lead that forward. And Lloyds are in a very good place. They've got some fantastic business development, broker development managers, that have been there for a long time. Malcolm Swan, John Saltonstall, to name another couple. And then we've got I keep saying that. They have got
43 years, quite hard to get rid of.
It's quite hard. And they've got some fantastic relationship managers. So I think Lloyds have got it right. That's not to say that it was always going right. There were very, very big frustrations that I had when the bank were making wrong decisions, but I'm delighted to say that this one that they've just made is absolutely the right decision to bring the team together as a healthcare team again, which is what we had, back in the early days.
And you were saying, Steve, that your own plans, you were due to leave earlier in 20, and you had quite big plans for that year, didn't you? Yeah. So the impact for you personally, what was that kind of personal impact as a result of COVID for you and your family?
Went you off to the Olympics or something? Yeah. It was Japan, wasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, there was all sorts of things. I mean, the biggest thing that we did is that we moved house. So we'd been 28 years in a little village called Wharton, just outside of Devizes. And so we used 2020 as the year to move. And we're here now, just outside of Castle Combe, in a lovely property. All the kids have gone, so we're here on our own. But it's a great party house, and not that we've been able to have too many parties. But so I moving house was the massive thing for us. And I spent we moved in November 2020, and or early November, and then I retired a month later. So I was able and to be fair, up until that point, I was based at home doing the COVID stuff back in the old house, and nobody could do anything. And they're absolutely right. I mean, I was due to go to the Olympics in 2000, and obviously that was then delayed, and and obviously I never got to that in the end. But I'm really happy to be here now. We did a lot of work on the house in the first 6 months, and and there's a lot going on, and obviously working with you guys is
it's nice to have you on board.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the finance team, it's brilliant.
And how are you finding that? Because obviously you've been talking, passionately about being a banker and doing things on the banking side, and now you're on the other side. You kind of flipped from being within the bank to somebody who now arranges deals for clients, and you then introduce them into the bank. How have you found that switch? Because I know from other guys that we work with, in the early days, they found it quite alien, because they were effectively sitting in judgment as a bank would, as opposed to assessing a proposal and packaging it and presenting it. How have you found that?
I've really enjoyed it. I think it's what I've liked is the ability to get to know some of the other guys in the other banks, and some of them I already knew anyway. Because the one thing that I did manage to achieve over 16 years working in healthcare is you get to know so many people. You meet a lot of the other guys in banks at healthcare shows, the dental shows, pharmacy, GP shows, you name it, that we were always at. We've spent so much time at these shows, and it's quite refreshing. Even with some of the new banks that have entered into the game, Metro came and went. You've got Wesleyan, obviously very much there. Some of the more fringe banks, people like Braemar. In fact, I've got Steve Forsyth from Braemar coming for a cup of coffee at 11 o'clock this morning. So, that'll be nice to meet up with him again. And I've known the guys from Braemar for a long time. So the straight answer to your question is, I found it a pretty easy transition, because I tended to do quite a bit of assessment for other managers when I was with Lloyds. I wasn't just doing the deals myself. I was actually supporting other managers in moulding propositions to become bankable, working on credit policy. So I probably haven't found it as difficult as maybe some of my ex-colleagues. And it is really refreshing to talk to some of the other banks. And, I'm primarily working on two sectors now, as you said, veterinary and the GP side. I don't really want to get back into the dental side, because you've got David and James and Helen that are doing great stuff on the dental side. And to be honest with you, this is a consultancy part-time role, and I don't want it to take over my life. And I'm really enjoying dealing with new start vets and the accountants within the veterinary and also the GP side. And we've got a few deals that have been done now, a few others on the go. And if I can raise the FTA name with some vets and with doctors, and GPs, then that's what I want to do.
For us, it was great. Sorry, Dan. It was great to get you on board because obviously you've got the reputation and the presence.
Yeah.
And actually, Steve, you're a nice bloke as well. So that always helps, doesn't it? Do you know what I mean?
I must admit,
that's coming from
I was going to say, we do have a no dickheads policy. No dickheads policy is quite strong. We only want to work with people that we like. So you certainly pass that test. So it sounds like your transition was fairly smooth, to be honest. But just dipping back into the dental thing for a second, we're recording this at the very beginning of 22. We've got most of the year ahead of us. What are your predictions for the dental profession for the year coming, and is that likely to impact banking and funding in any shape or form?
I think dentistry is well set for 2022. I really do. I think that, again, not being 100% involved in it over the last sort of year or so, but my views, and I'm still in contact with a few dentists, is that some of them took out the COVID loans, and some of them actually haven't spent that money, which is quite interesting. I think that where they heavily invested and they're wanting to expand more, then I think that there are challenges around repayment capability when you start to factor in some of these large loans that have actually come out, because of course they're on relatively short-dated terms. But I think from if you look at the UDA performance side of things, obviously that's now dentists should now be able to achieve their UDA performances. I think that in my view, I think we are back to pre-pandemic levels. I think that the dental sector is better prepared in terms of anything that might potentially hit us going forward. And certainly the banks that I deal with are very, very proactive and green-lighted when it comes to supporting the dental sector in particular.
Well, it's the ultimate stress test, isn't it? We were saying, if you can, in a way, the 2008, 2009 was a bit of a stroll in a park in a bizarre way for dentistry. Whereas you look at what happened, if you wanted to stress test your business, COVID was the ultimate stress test.
Well, it does feel like a sector that's proven to be, recession proof, depression proof, and now pandemic proof, which is credit to the people in the profession. They're incredibly resilient and have the ability to do whatever is required.
I think the one thing it's probably taught them is that a lot of dentists now absolutely understand the financial fundamentals of their business more than they probably did before. Because to be fair, at the end of the day, and I've always said this, a dentist is first and foremost a clinician. They are not necessarily expert in business and finance. And if they're not, then, it's important that they surround themselves with people that are. But a lot of them have actually become a lot more savvy when it comes to the financial dynamics of their business. And that, I think, has got to be a good thing. And that probably applies to all of the healthcare professions as well, really.
Yeah. So tell us about your flying, Steve, because from the outside looking in, that looks like an incredibly intense, highly technical, focused thing.
Expensive
as well. But from the way we've only briefly talked about this before, but it sounds like for you it's like a form of relaxation. So it seems that there's a bit of a disconnect between the intensity of it needing all your attention and focus, yet you do it as something to relax.
Yeah. You're absolutely right, Andy. I think, as I say, my passion was always to fly. And just got the bit of history on that one is that when I hit the magic 50, my wife arranged for a lot of our friends to club together and get me a couple of flying lessons because she thought that, we'll get it out of his system, blah, blah, blah. So here we are, and 11 years later, nearly 12 years later, I've been flying, had my license for 10 years, and I try and fly if I can every week. In fact, I am going to fly. It's a beautiful, beautiful day today, and once I've kicked Steve Forsyth out of the door at about lunchtime, I'm going to drop down to Thruxton, which is actually is a little bit of a drive for me now. It's about an hour and a quarter from where I'm living now. because I've not moved because I'm in a syndicate of 8 people. So I'm wandering down to Thruxton, and I'm going to go out for a flight this afternoon.
Oh, very nice.
So in terms of, it is the skill set that you need for flying. I wanted to be mentally challenged and do something that was totally different to banking. 10 years or so ago, 11, 12 years ago now, and flying is that. There is nothing better to be up above the clouds and in the sunshine on a dismal day, as you can obviously get up off the ground and you can get back again. So I sort of extended my training to take in instrument flying as well, so I can actually get myself above the clouds. And I absolutely love it. We've got for the flying enthusiasts out there, I've got a Piper PA-28 Arrow.
We've seen a picture of it, I think. Didn't you show us some pictures of it? Wasn't it?
Oh, I show everybody.
Would you like to do that now? No, I'm joking. Here it is.
I'll spare people that. There's 8 of us in it, and I can pretty much get it whenever I want it. We've got a booking system, and I'll go up for an hour on my own today. I do tend to take a lot of people up, and I know you guys are quite keen to.
Yeah, definitely.
And so if you're free this afternoon, and you can whip along to Thruxton, we'll have an hour up.
Might be a stretch.
I'm looking forward. Looking forward to the trolley service.
It does have the old ashtrays in it.
There you go. Not a lot of smoke, but hey, it's almost worth it.
But I think it's really nice. I think it's important to have something as a distraction. Particularly most people's daily lives can be quite stressful and they're quite focused. So to have something which is completely different, and it's lovely because you've also found something you're passionate about, which I think lots of people struggle with. So it's great to hear that.
It's interesting, the flying. It's just a fascinating one, isn't it? It's like people going for a drive or going for a walk. You go for a fly to spend an hour on your own in a plane, which gives you a bit of almost like centering time. Getting back to you, almost earthing yourself in a sort of like very new agey way. But do you know what I mean? It's
by leaving the planet.
When you come back to Earth. I could get so many metaphors out of this.
In the past, I have taken a couple of my bosses up, and it's been quite good because I've always done it sort of at the time when it comes up to performance reviews. So,
have you taken your hands off, Steve, and gone, okay, your turn?
So they know that they have to say the right thing.
I'll bet.
Now, you see, that's just a canny salesman, that is. That's just a...
Well, Steve, your journey, your story, it's fascinating.
It is fascinating.
I like that. I genuinely will be surprised if we get to talk to somebody else who has spent 4+ decades working through one profession. So I think it's a fascinating story. We always wrap up by asking our guests the same 2 questions, and the first one is, if you could be the fly on a wall with somebody in a certain situation, what would that situation be, and who would you be watching over?
I'm leaning forward intently, waiting for the answer.
I'll tell you what, this was a real interesting one, and I've sort of gone a little bit off piece here. I mean, obviously being a career banker with Lloyds for 43 years, there was a particular moment in history where pretty much the wheels came off. And of course, if I go back to 2008 and the financial crash, there was a certain drinks party that was held at, I think, probably number 11 Downing Street, or in the city, where Gordon Brown, he was Prime Minister at the time, wasn't he, I think? He met Victor Blank, Sir Victor Blank, who was the chairman of Lloyds Bank. And sort of on the quiet said to him, Sir Victor, do you think that you'd be able to take on Bank of Scotland? And I'd love to have been a fly on the wall in that conversation. And I still don't think we will know the full story of that one in terms of what went on then. But suffice to say that Lloyds effectively rescued 8th boss at the time.
It wasn't a bitter pill at all, was it, Steve?
Well,
just in case anybody listening thought that was interference. Steve actually really went.
And, I remember a Lloyds Bank share price of approaching £10.
Oh, don't we all? Yeah.
I know that obviously the shares have been somewhat diluted and changed around since then, but here we are at 55p. So
I suppose were you like me, Steve? You had these were my bankers for the future. I had all these shares that I'd accumulated. I thought this is going to be a right result. Yeah. To which the answer is they're quite useful if I need to set fire to a log or something.
20 times dilution. Yeah. Oh, that would be an interesting one. That would be an interesting one.
That for me would have been a very interesting one. I did think about the good old things in time, with the war and all the rest of it. But I thought, no, actually, that one, particularly with 43 years in the bank, I thought that's actually something that I've been very interested to understand the full story behind it.
And imagine if he'd have said no. I mean, what would have happened then? I mean, would the government had to step in and buy HBOS like they partly did with Lloyds and RBS? I mean, it's amazing, isn't it?
Lloyds would not have been in that position if it would have just been RBS and HBOS, but I think HBOS would have failed. I mean, it was a bloody basket case.
Yeah.
Sorry for anybody that's listening that was with HBOS, but some of I don't think they really had a lending policy. It was just a question of, do you want £5 million? Oh, yeah, there you go, off you go. Not quite sure how we're going to get it repaid, but don't worry about it. It was awful.
Remarkable times. And our second question that we ask is, if you could meet anybody at all, fact, fiction, living from years ago, living, who would you like to meet?
Well, again, I've got a bit off the wall on this one. I love my music. I played in a band for 10 years, and I've been very lucky to go and see some fantastic performers. There's one regret that I have, and I think that he was probably, in my lifetime, one of the greatest male singers, which I won't be able to see now. And I just love his music, and I think he was fantastic. And that's George Michael. I know, bit off the wall, but I love his music, and I just wish that I'd been to see him live. So that's one of my biggest regrets, that I never was able to do. So that would probably be one that's a bit left of field, that one. But
no, he was.
You'll be pleased to hear. I think someone might be working on a documentary on George Michael, which would be fascinating. I found out, and how about this? You'll like this, Steve. George Michael still pays for the Christmas lights on Highgate Village.
Yeah.
I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? He said he liked the lights, so therefore he's going to put money away. I think it's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was a very generous guy.
And troubled. It's a shame it's a shame, really, that if he would have been, probably 20 years later, he probably wouldn't be quite so troubled.
Yeah. You're probably
Just
right.
changing attitudes.
Yeah. No, that's brilliant, Steve. I appreciate your time. I think your stories are great. I think you've had a fascinating career, and I think there's still more for you to do as well. So it's been absolutely fabulous.
Yeah, it's brilliant. It's brilliant.
God, Steve's a good guy, isn't he?
He's a nice bloke. I tell you what, 43 years, that's flipping forever.
I remember when Ryan Giggs, the footballer, finished his career with Manchester United. It was being kind of heralded as kind of probably the end of a generation where a football player plays their whole career with one team. And then you kind of relate that, and I think he was played for that football team for 20 years or whatever it was. And then you look at Steve, who spent 43 years, 4.5 decades virtually with one employer. I can't envisage a situation, given changing employment sectors, markets and new industries, that anybody would end up working within a particular sector or profession.
Well, especially in finance, because they seem to early retire people like there's no tomorrow.
Yeah.
So I think, it's going to be an amazing achievement. And I mean, the changes that he's seen, I know I'm similar age, and the banking bit is, I remember we didn't have fax machines.
Yeah.
Can you imagine that? Not having a fax machine. You had to have someone who typed a note on something. They had secretaries. It's just fascinating that these then moved on to where he is. In 43 years, I wonder whether that's longer. Well, it is longer because of COVID. Because he probably would have gone at 40 or something.
Yeah, I think he probably stuck another year on the end that wasn't bad. But he seemed to have nice balance, recently moved house, flies his aeroplane, still plays sport. He is a good example of somebody who has got lots of ticks in lots of boxes.
He's a great guy and a really good team player. I didn't mention it on the thing, but I think that one of the things that really impressed me about Steve, we've known him for a long time, was when he came and worked with finance, and he drove all the way from Devizes or wherever it is he lives now in Wiltshire to come to our Christmas do, and then drove all the way back.
Yeah.
I mean,
to be seen,
that's
to
a
take
real
part.
team player.
Oh, yeah,
that is a real team player. Like, huge hats off and credit to him. But no, nice bloke.
Yeah,
really nice bloke.
Really, really enjoyable. Thank you for listening to this episode of Dentology, where we discuss the business of dentistry. If you like what you heard, please do subscribe where you found this episode. That would be amazing. And also follow us on Instagram.